Have you ever wondered what a person is worth? Not in dollars or land or the weight of their name, but in the quiet currency of their soul. And what happens when a soul, pushed to the very edge of desperation, collides with a kindness so unexpected it feels like a miracle? This is a story about that collision, in a place where miracles were as rare as rain in a dry summer, and a person's worth was often measured by the color of their skin or the contents of their purse. It begins, as so many stories of hardship do, with a choice that felt like no choice at all. Leanne stood before the warped glass of Finch's General Store, the reflection that stared back a stranger she barely recognized. The woman in the glass was a ghost, her face pale and drawn, her body swollen with a life that was both a promise and a terrifying burden. Her dress, a simple prairie garment of faded gray cotton, hung about her form, a testament to a life pared down to its barest essentials. The dust of redemption, a town that offered little of its namesake, settled in the folds of her skirt and clung to the worn leather of her late husband's boots, the only sturdy things she owned. Inside her clenched fist, a small, simple gold band grew warm against her skin. It was the last piece of way she had left. It was her past, her promise, the silent, perfect circle of a love that had been her entire world. Now it had to become her future. It had to become flour and beans and perhaps a little salt pork. It had to become survival. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp twisting in her gut that had nothing to do with the hunger gnawing at her. Selling it felt like a betrayal deeper than any she could imagine, like digging up his grave to sell the bones. But the life inside her kicked, a faint, insistent flutter, and the choice was made. Way would have understood. He would have insisted. He had loved this child before he had even been a whisper on the wind. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that tasted of dust and despair, Leanne pushed open the heavy wooden door, a small bell announcing her arrival with a jangle that sounded to her ears like a death knell. The air inside Finch's establishment was a suffocating blanket woven from the smells of cured meats, dill pickles, chewing tobacco, and the thin, acrid smoke from the storekeeper's cigarillo. It was the scent of commerce, but for Leanne, it was the smell of defeat. Mr. Finch sat perched on a high stool behind the counter, a small, bitter man whose eyes, like two polished river stones, missed nothing and valued little. He watched her approach, his gaze sweeping over her pregnant form, her foreign features, and the threadbare state of her dress. There was no welcome in his eyes, only calculation. He saw not a woman in need, but a problem, or perhaps an opportunity for a shrewd bargain. She stopped before the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs, the words caught in her throat, strangled by shame. She simply opened her hand and placed the gold ring on the worn, knife-scarred wood. It looked impossibly small and vulnerable there, a tiny beacon of light in the dim, cluttered store. "I need to sell this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of flies buzzing near a barrel of molasses. Finch picked it up, pinching it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something distasteful. He held it close to his eye, squinting, though there were no jewels to inspect, no intricate carvings to appraise. It was just gold and love. He only saw the gold. He grunted, tossing it back onto the counter. It landed with a soft, pathetic clink. "Not much here. It's thin." He took a long, deliberate drag from his cigarillo, exhaling a cloud of smoke that made Leanne's eyes water. "I'll give you $2, enough for a sack of flour and some dried beans." $2. The words fell like stones into the deep well of her despair. $2 for the symbol of her entire married life. It was an insult. It was charity wrapped in the guise of a transaction, designed to make her feel small, to remind her of her place. She had hoped for 5, prayed for 7. $2 would last a week, maybe 2 if she starved herself. And then what? The baby would be here soon. Her hands trembled. "Please, sir," she began, her voice cracking. "It is pure gold. It is worth more." Finch laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Worth what someone's willing to pay, missy. And in this town, for a plain little thing like that, $2 is generous. Take it or leave it." He turned his attention to a ledger, dismissing her, leaving her to stand in a silence that was louder and more painful than his cruel words. A man had entered the store so quietly that neither Leanne nor the preoccupied Mr. Finch had noticed. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that seemed at odds with his appearance. He was tall and broad, covered in the fine, pale dust of the trail, his face weathered by sun and wind into a mask of stoic neutrality. His hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that seemed to hold the vast, lonely expanse of the plains themselves. He wasn't handsome in the way of town dandies, but there was a solidness to him, a stillness that commanded attention without demanding it. This was Jasper. He had been standing outside, leaning against a support post in the shade of the overhang, watching Leanne hesitate before the door. He had seen the conflict in her posture, the desperate squaring of her shoulders before she went inside. He had felt a familiar ache in his own chest, a ghost of a memory he spent most of his days trying to outride. He had followed her in, not with any clear intention, but pulled by an instinct he didn't understand. He moved to the back of the store, his boots making soft, rhythmic sounds on the floorboards. He picked up a sack of coffee beans, weighing it in his hand, his gaze fixed on the transaction unfolding at the counter. He saw it all, the woman's fragile dignity, the shopkeeper's predatory glee, the small circle of gold that lay between them like a contested border. He heard the cruel offer and saw the hope drain from Leanne's face, replaced by a hollow resignation that he knew all too well. It was the look of a soul surrendering. He could have walked away. It was not his business. The world was full of casual cruelty and private sorrows. He carried more than his own share. But he stayed, the weight of the coffee sack in his hand grounding him, his presence a silent counterpoint to Finch's oppressive authority. The air in the store grew thick with unspoken things, with the weight of a decision that would change more than one life. Jasper knew that moments like these were hinges upon which futures swung, and for a reason he couldn't name, he felt compelled not to let this one close on a note of sorrow. Leanne felt the fight drain out of her. Her shoulders slumped. $2. It was nothing, but it was also everything. It was the difference between eating tonight and not. With a hand that felt disconnected from her body, she reached for the coins Finch had disdainfully slid across the counter. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, and a wave of nausea washed over her. This was it, the final severing, the moment she traded memory for sustenance. Just as her fingers were about to close around the coins, a voice cut through the heavy silence. It was low and steady, like the slow current of a deep river. "That's a fine ring." Jasper had moved forward, his steps so measured they were almost soundless. He now stood near the end of the counter, his expression unreadable.
Finch looked up, startled and annoyed. "It's just a piece of scrap. None of your concern, stranger."
Jasper ignored him completely. His gaze, surprisingly gentle, rested on Leanne. He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time since Way's passing, she felt seen, not as a curiosity or a burden, but as a person. "What was his name?" he asked softly. The question was a soft blow to her heart. No one had asked his name. To the town, he was just the Chinese man from the railroad who had died of a fever, a brief entry in the town's ledger of misfortunes. To Finch, he was the original owner of a piece of scrap. But to Jasper, he was a man with a name. A tear she hadn't realized she was holding back slipped down her cheek. "Way," she whispered, the name a prayer on her lips. Jasper gave a slow, solemn nod. A universe of understanding passed in that small gesture. He turned his gaze to Finch, and the gentleness was gone, replaced by something as hard and unyielding as granite. "A ring that carries a name like that is worth more than scrap," he said, his voice dropping even lower. He reached into his vest. "I'll give you $20 for it." The offer hung in the air, electric. $20. It was a fortune. It was more than Finch made in a week. The storekeeper's greedy eyes widened, his mind scrambling to calculate his new advantage. Mr. Finch's demeanor shifted instantly, his contempt for Leanne replaced by an oily avarice directed at the stranger. $20, you say?" he began, a sycophant smile spreading across his thin lips. "Well now, that's a more respectable figure. A man of your discernment can see the quality." He started to reach for the ring, intending to broker the sale himself and likely pocket a portion, but Jasper stopped him with a look. He stepped forward, his body shielding Leanne from the storekeeper. He took a heavy, worn leather purse from his belt and untied the drawstring. The sound was a rich, musical clinking of coins, a sound of substance and security that filled the small store. He did not hand the purse to Finch. Instead, he placed it directly on the counter in front of Leanne, pushing it gently towards her trembling hands. The weight of it made the wood groan softly. "This is for you," he said, his voice quiet but firm, meant for her alone. "Keep your ring." Leanne stared at the purse, then at the man's shadowed face, her mind unable to process the magnitude of the gesture. Her throat was tight with 1,000 unsaid words of gratitude and confusion. I cannot," she stammered, shaking her head. "It is too much. I am a stranger to you." This was a debt she could never repay, and the weight of such an obligation was almost as terrifying as the poverty it erased. Jasper's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a brief glimpse of the deep well of sorrow he carried within him. "Someone did the same for me once, when I had nothing left," he said, the words simple but heavy with unspoken history. "I'm just passing it along. It's not a debt. It's just a kindness." He offered no more explanation, leaving the mystery of his past intact. He then turned back to the counter, picked up his sack of coffee beans, and placed a separate coin down for Finch, his movements economical and final. He had done what he came to do. Without another word or a backward glance at the stunned woman or the sputtering storekeeper, he turned and walked out of the store, the bell above the door marking his departure with a soft, final chime. Leanne stood frozen for a long moment after Jasper had gone, the heavy purse a solid, unbelievable reality beneath her fingertips. The weight of it was the weight of a second chance. "Mister." Finch stared at the coin Jasper had left for the coffee, then at the purse still sitting on his counter, his face a mask of thwarted greed. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to lay some claim to the money, but he saw the look in Leanne's eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. She took the purse, her fingers closing around the worn leather, and with her other hand she picked up her wedding ring, slipping it back onto her finger where it belonged. It slid into place as if breathing a sigh of relief. She gave Finch a single, level look of defiance and gratitude that was not meant for him, and then she turned and walked out into the blinding summer sun. The world outside the store seemed different. The heat felt less like an oppressive force and more like a warm embrace. The dusty street, which had seemed so hostile just moments before, now looked like a path forward. A few townspeople had been loitering on the boardwalk, pretending not to watch the drama unfolding through the store's large front window. They had seen the tall stranger, the confrontation, the astonishing act of charity. As Leanne emerged, clutching the purse, the usual whispers and sideways glances were replaced by a hesitant, curious silence. Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, a woman whose stern expression usually made Leanne hurry past, was standing by the door to her own shop. Their eyes met. For weeks, Mrs. Gable had seen Leanne as just another mouth to feed, another outsider straining the town's limited resources. But what she had just witnessed was not a beggar receiving a handout. It was a woman of profound dignity being honored. A slow, tentative smile touched the baker's wife's lips. It was a small thing, but to Leanne it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. It was the beginning of a thaw, the first crack in the wall of isolation that had surrounded her. The stranger's kindness had not just filled her purse, it had planted a seed of compassion in the hardened soil of the town itself. Returning to the one-room cabin at the very edge of town, Leanne felt as if she were walking in a dream. The small, rough-hewn structure had always felt like a cage of poverty, its thin walls barely keeping out the elements and the world's indifference. But today, as she stepped across the threshold, it felt like a sanctuary. She barred the door, a profound sense of safety washing over her. With trembling hands, she sat at her small, wobbly table and untied the leather purse. The contents spilled out, a cascade of silver and copper coins that gleamed in the single shaft of sunlight piercing the dim interior. She counted it. There was more than $30. It was an impossible sum, a king's ransom. It meant rent paid for the rest of the year. It meant meat for the stew pot, milk from the farmer, and warm flannel for the baby. It was not just survival. It was a foundation. It was a future. Tears of pure, unadulterated relief streamed down her face, washing away the dust and the fear. She picked up her wedding ring, holding it to her lips. She whispered to the quiet room, to the memory of her husband. I kept it. I kept my promise. She could almost feel his presence, a gentle warmth around her, a sense of approval, of peace. A sudden, strong kick from within her womb startled her, and she laughed through her tears, placing a hand on her belly. The child, who had been a source of such deep anxiety, now felt like the powerful affirmation of life he was always meant to be. The fear was gone, burned away by the bright flame of a stranger's compassion. In the following days, a new energy filled her. She moved with purpose. She visited the general store, walking past Mr. Finch with her head held high, and bought not just flour, but sugar, lard, and coffee. She purchased yards of soft cotton and spent her evenings by candlelight, her needle flying as she stitched tiny shirts and diapers, each stitch a testament to her renewed hope. Her quiet strength, once a flickering ember, now burned with a steady, confident light. The money was a tool, but the true gift Jasper had given her was the belief that she was worthy of it. Miles away, where the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon, Jasper made camp by a small, gurgling creek. He unsaddled his horse, a powerful roan named Ghost, and let him drink from the cool water. As the last light of day faded, Jasper built a small fire, the flames dancing and casting long shadows that seemed to whisper stories from his past. He stared into the fire, but he wasn't seeing the burning wood. He was seeing another fire, years ago. A prairie fire that had moved with the speed and fury of a demon, consuming everything in its path. It had taken his small homestead, his future, and his Maria. He could still hear her cries, still smell the smoke, still feel the searing heat that had scarred his back and his soul. He had woken up days later in a stranger's bed, his body broken, his world ashes. A quiet Mennonite family had found him wandering the blackened plains, delirious with grief and pain. They had taken him in without question. They fed him, mended his wounds, and, when he was strong enough, they gave him a horse and a purse with $20, everything they could spare. "God puts us where we need to be," the old farmer had said, his voice thick with a German accent. "Go and do good." Jasper had been passing it along ever since. He never stayed in one place for long. He drifted from town to town, taking odd jobs, always moving, as if he could outrun the ghosts that rode with him. He saw Maria's face in every struggling woman, heard his unborn child's cry in the silence of the night. The kindness he showed to Leanne wasn't about her. It was about Maria. It was an offering to a memory, a desperate attempt to balance the scales of a cruel world. By saving Leanne, he was trying, in some small way, to save the woman he had failed to protect. He pulled a small, tarnished silver locket from beneath his shirt. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew the face inside. He held it for a long moment, then tucked it away, the cold metal a familiar weight against his heart, as he settled down to sleep beneath a blanket of indifferent stars. The summer wore on, the days long and heavy with heat. The seed of kindness Jasper had planted in Redemption continued to grow. Leanne, no longer a phantom haunting the edges of town, became a quiet fixture. Her pregnancy was now obvious and undeniable, and the town, led by Mrs. Gable's example, began to see it not as a shame, but as a simple fact of life. The baker's wife would often find an excuse to visit, bringing a warm loaf of bread or a small pot of jam, her gruff questions about Leanne's health barely concealing a deep maternal concern. The blacksmith, a man of few words, sent his eldest son over with a neatly stacked cord of firewood, refusing any payment. The community, once a source of judgment, was slowly weaving a tentative net of support around her. Leanne accepted their offerings with a grace and gratitude that further endeared her to them. She, in turn, shared what she could, offering to mend shirts or watch a shopkeeper's child for an hour. One evening, as a dark, bruised-looking storm gathered on the horizon, the first sharp pain gripped her. It was time. The contractions began slowly, but as the wind howled outside and rain began to lash against her small cabin, they grew in intensity. Fear, a cold and familiar companion, tried to creep back into her heart. She was alone. The midwife was in the next town over, and the storm was making the roads impassable. She lit every lamp she had, fighting against the encroaching darkness, both outside and within. Her labor was a fierce, primal battle, and for a terrifying moment she feared she would lose. But through her window, Mrs. Gable saw the lamps burning bright, long after they should have been extinguished. She knew. Pulling a heavy shawl over her head, she braved the storm, her own lamp swinging wildly in the wind. She was not the only one. Other women, drawn by an unspoken understanding, followed. They slipped into the cabin, their faces etched with concern and resolve, bringing with them hot water, clean linens, and the steady, calming strength of shared experience. The community that had once cast her out had come to bring her child into the world. As the storm raged, the small cabin became a haven of warmth and quiet efficiency. The women worked together, their movements sure and practiced, their voices low and encouraging. They spoke to Leanne in soothing tones, wiping her brow with cool cloths and holding her hands when the pains became unbearable. Outside, the thunder cracked and the wind howled its fury, but inside there was only the focused, powerful energy of life's oldest ritual. Leanne, surrounded by these women who were once strangers, found a strength she never knew she possessed. She was not alone. She was held, supported, and cared for. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in pale shades of gray and rose, the storm finally broke, and in the quiet stillness that followed, a new sound filled the room, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Gable carefully cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft flannel blanket before placing him in his mother's arms. "You have a son," she whispered, her stern face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. Leanne looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her child, and her heart swelled with a love so immense it left no room for any other emotion. He was here. He was safe. She had done it. She named him An, the word for peace in her native tongue, a prayer for the life she hoped he would lead. From a ridge overlooking the town, Jasper watched the storm pass. He had lingered for weeks, unable to pull himself away, needing to see the story through. He saw the lights in Leanne's cabin all night, saw the women coming and going. As the sun rose, he saw the smoke begin to curl from her chimney, a simple domestic sign that all was well. A profound sense of relief, of a duty fulfilled, settled over him. He had not righted the wrongs of his own past, but he had helped shape a better future for someone else. That was enough. He would not go down to the cabin. He was a ghost, a catalyst. His part in this story was over. Tipping the brim of his hat in a silent salute to the small cabin and the new life within it, Jasper turned ghost towards the open plains and rode away, a solitary figure disappearing into the promise of the morning sun. Leanne held on close, her wedding ring gleaming on the hand that stroked his soft cheek. She was a widow and a mother, a survivor and a beginning. Her future and that of her son was now her own, built on a foundation of resilience and paid for with a stranger's kindness. And isn't that the true measure of a person's worth? Not what they have, but what they are willing to give away, creating ripples of hope that can transform a life and even a town forever.